What is the dumbest idea you have ever had that actually worked? When I was in college we had to sneak beer and other booze into the dorms, as it was a dry campus and we were also under 21. Fortunately for us, we lived in an old converted motel, so we would remove the air conditioner from the wall, which gave us direct access to outside. Once we also removed the grate on the outside, since we lived on the ground floor. We then made 2 hinges for the grate on the outside, so it would stay attached and could swing open and closed. When we wanted to sneak stuff in, we would jiggle the AC unit loose and remove it, pulling it into the room, swing open the grate, and pass the booze through. I consider it brilliant, but many others thought we were stupid. Worked every time though. In university I was late on an assignment that was supposed to be in my TA's Dropbox by noon that day. I didn't manage to get there until almost 3, so I was sure he had already emptied it. Now, the drop boxes were literal boxes in cubbies with a slot on the front and a lock on them that prevented them from being pulled out. The rack holding them was just a basic metal frame with about 5 rows of boxes. My TA's box was somewhere in the middle of the shelf. So I figured, I'm late anyways, why not take a chance? And slipped my assignment into the box below my TA's box. I got my assignment handed back a few weeks later than everyone else, and it had a note from another TA scribbled on it that said, "Looks like this fell into my box by mistake." Double quote. I got full marks on the assignment. I once faked being sick when I was in middle school and told my mom I had a sore throat and felt a cold coming on. She took me to the doctor and it turned out that I did, in fact, have strep throat lol. Task failed successfully. Maybe the doctor was being a total bro. As a 30-year-old doctor I can confirm sometimes, when the mom is too annoying we'll just be like, okay boomer, and give the kid some crap to shut them both up. In college I was taking a class that required me to purchase an online textbook and workbook that was registered under your name, basically ensuring that each student would have to buy a new online copy each semester instead of buying used textbooks. I had a friend who took this class a semester before me, so we came up with the idea to message customer service and explain that I had recently gotten married, so my last name had changed, and I legally changed my first name from my friend's first name to my first name, and I would need them to change it in their system. It totally worked and the rep even congratulated me on my marriage. I think it's nearly criminal to enforce students to buy new books instead of used ones, especially when it's the professor's own textbook. I've never had a prof who wrote the textbook, but for one class another prof had written the textbook. First day of class the writing prof showed up and passed around a flash drive with his book on it. Back in high school, I stopped by one of my teacher's rooms after class to ask him some questions about our homework. When I walked in, I noticed he was grading some of our tests. Of note, all of his tests were made up of multiple choice, true, false, or matching, and all of the answers were bubbled in. What I noticed was that instead of using an answer key to grade, he was just placing a stencil over the paper with the correct bubble punched out. The stencil wasn't transparent, so all it showed was whether we bubbled in the right answer or not. Flash forward to our next test, and I'm stuck on a TF question. Knowing how he graded, I figured I'd bubble in both T and F, and if he caught it, it would be easy enough to claim it was an accident. Well, he didn't catch it, and I used that trick the rest of the year for a little extra boost on all of his tests. I used to know a guy who, every week, would order his Saturday night curry for delivery while sitting in the pub and then walk over the road to the curry house and get it and himself delivered home. This went on for about 10-12 weeks. One week, we were sitting having a pint and the owner of the curry house walked in, took his order, and had him picked up from the pub. He said it was easier for everyone concerned. Bobcat tire blew during a job. Had another tire, but no jack. Positioned the Bobcat behind a dump truck. Bobcat then tries to lift the ass end of the dump truck. Dump truck hella heavy. Bobcat lifted itself instead. tire changed and back to work. That sounds like a good way to end up crushed by a skid steer. It was a dicey situation to say the least. But it was far superior to any other idea being suggested at the time. I even remember me saying this is a bad idea. And it was my idea. Far from the dumbest working idea in the thread. But I once got an extra day to work on a video project in high school by coming to class with a video that was just a quarter second of blackness. Eagerly volunteering to go first. Then acting confused and scared when the file didn't work. The teacher took pity on me and told me to just bring it the following day. And I got to finish it that evening and still got full credit as if I did it on time. I once completely blanked on an essay assignment and didn't realize till I was sitting in class. Luckily, the teacher didn't collect the essays till the end of class and I proceeded to write the whole paper in my notebook during lecture. When people were handing in essays, I went up and told the teacher that I forgot to print it. But I had a version in my email, showing him the handwritten one to prove I had completed the assignment. He let me go print it and I typed the whole thing up in like 5 minutes. Ran back, handed it in and got like a C or B. Couldn't argue that since I was about to get a 0. It probably wouldn't work in this day and age, but back when I was young I was tired of retail and wanted an office job. I just lied my ass off and pulled a total George Costanza what with friends coached to answer their phones as a business and such. Got hired as an admin assistant and been steadily moving up since. We had a noisy rotating rooster weather vane, loud enough to keep people awake on windy nights. Despite having been lubed. So I filled the hole the rooster rotates in with Crisco. Even though people said it was a dumb idea and wouldn't work. Never had to lube it again because the Crisco didn't break down like other lubes. We were at a friend's house about to cook a roast. It needed to be patted dry with paper towel. But he was all out. I semi-jokingly suggested using a couple slices of bread. We all chuckled at the idea. It worked perfectly. I might do this on purpose the next time I cook meat that needs to be patted dry. Thanks for the idea. Also a great tip for skimming fat. Yep. Then drop that fat-soaked bread onto a warm frying pan until it crisps up. I do not wonder why the doctor frowns upon my diet. One time I sent a letter to a local address by putting the return address as the address I wanted it to go to. Not putting postage. And dropping it off in a public mailbox. Went to the return to sender due to insufficient postage. Was really desperate to leave past employer after 15 years. Had been applying and interviewing and striking out. Finally got an interview at a place where, at the time, I felt, man, I am not really sure this is right for me. But anything is better than where I am at. Double quote. Instead of prepping for the interview, rehearsing answers, etc., I pulled an Office Space. I was cocky, brash, unconcerned. Made it seem like I was happy where I was at and didn't really care if I got the job or not. They called me back the next week and I waited a week to return their call. Same deal with the second interview. When they offered me the job, I hemmed and hawed. Said I needed to think about it really hard. And that it was a big move for me. Etc. etc. I came back and demanded well over $15,000 above what they were offering in salary. They accepted. I forgot to bring a resume to a job interview. But I had an index card in my bag. I cut the index card in half and wrote my name, my contact info, and creative problem solver in my best handwriting. And gave a copy of my business card to both the interviewers. I got the job. This idea could have easily gotten me fired if it went wrong. I was working as art director at an animation studio, making videos for clients. One client was especially pesky about the use of yellow in the background. They wanted it to be that of their logo, which was this horrible neon piss yellow. We advised against it, but after numerous calls we had to cave and gave a version with that color. They hated it and asked for a change. What followed were 12 versions with numerous calls in between tweaking the color over and over. Eventually I got tired of it and just sent the original version again. I didn't even bother to rename the file. The client said this looks exactly the way I wanted. Thank you. How that ever went right I still have no idea. When I was younger I got called into HR because I drew a very detailed picture of a penis. It was really good. The HR meeting happened like a week after I drew it and my only defense was I don't recall doing that. Do you happen to have the picture? It might jog my memory. They didn't have it of course because I had it. And because I didn't confess they couldn't do shit. Investigation results inconclusive. Have a nice day. Our power was out due to a storm. I had a camp stove to use for boiling water to make a coffee pour through. But I couldn't use my electric grinder for the coffee beans. I tried fashioning a mortar and pestle but it was taking too long. So I put the coffee beans in a couple of Ziploc bags. Placed the bag right behind a car tire. Then ran over it back and forth a couple of times to crush the beans. Worked like a charm. Edit to add, lol it took reading through a few comments but now I see I wrote mortal and not mortar. I'm stuck on a cliff. But if I jump at a really sharp angle at that gravel field, I could just slide down there and be fine. Just like in TV. Double quote. Every time I think about this I am amazed I'm not either flattened by a rock or impact against something. Childhood really is just the tutorial level sometimes. I hated my math teacher and she was making us do a project on patterns even though we were in 7th grade. So my pattern was a series of increasingly longer sideways penises. She didn't even notice and I got an A. Got a really long drill bit stuck in a piece of thick wood, butcher's block. I tried everything I could think of to yank it out. My solution that ended up working for me was attaching the drill bit to a chain. Put the chain on my truck. And have a piece of wood kind of stuck between two branches of a tree. I drove off slowly and it popped right out. Edit. To the many wondering on how I hooked up the bit to the chain. The drill bit was a long spade drill bit. The end sticking out of the block was long enough that I could bend into a little hook. Attached the chain to the hook. Bent the hook in a little further. And tada! It was now another link in the chain. Years ago I remember applying to a bunch of copywriting jobs and feeling frustrated because I wasn't hearing back from any of the places I was applying. It was especially frustrating because I was putting in all this time on cover letters and I felt like nobody was even reading them. So I said, fuck it. I'm gonna write one that is ridiculous. That is more me. I absolutely thought it was a dumb idea and never imagined that it would work. But somehow it did. I applied with this cover letter, http I imgur com hma3i4b png in the subject line copywriter. Will work for beer to a job that I was underqualified for. It managed to catch the eye of the headhunter for the ad agency and was enough to get me an interview. Shortly after that I was hired and ended up working there for a few years. However, this probably wouldn't work everywhere. But it fit the culture of the agency. Plus the job listing said that I would be working for beer brands as clients and that free beer was a perk of the job. In my freshman year of college, my grades were really not great. And my parents were really strict about getting good grades. When my dad asked to see my grades, I panicked and did the inspect command on the computer where you can change typefaces on the screen to read different words and letters. I changed all of my shitty grades to good grades. My dad was so happy that I did good my first year of school. He asked me to print my results. I did. And turns out he had to send them to our car insurance company for a good student discount. Ultimately, I committed insurance fraud by accident. But I got the discount. When I was like 7 years old I was playing in my back garden with those incredibly bouncy little balls you got. Just bouncing them high off the house and letting them bounce randomly before trying to catch them. As you did. One time I went for this huge throw off the wall and it bounced crazily off various surfaces so fast I completely lost track of it. So my 7-year-old logic was to stand back in the same place and throw another ball the same way. I watched it bounce this way and that about 10 times before finally hitting a plant and coming to a rest in a flower bed. I went over to pull back the foliage and sure enough there were both balls literally lying touching each other in the mud. At the time I was like, yep, makes sense. But over the years since then I've often thought about it and how the hell it worked. My headphones kept cutting out. So I took a toothpick and scraped the inside of the headphone jack on my phone. Several clumps of dust fell out. And afterwards the headphones worked just fine. Did the same with the charging port on my phone. I'd been assuming the contacts were broken or the cable was. But no. The plug just wasn't staying in well enough. There was a swarm of hornets that had made a nest under the front of our porch with only one specific narrow entry in or out. Spray wouldn't work and it was right under our front door. So had no way to keep exterminating them. Then I realized why not wearing blades of metal? We did have an old 50s metal fan and I could maybe blow them away from the entrance so they had no way to get in. The unanticipated effect was that it worked. Though after a few hours had created a civil war battlefield of dead or dying hornets piling up like a zombie tower in World War Z. Every few moments you'd hear thunk as another hornet fell into the trap. So satisfying. I was pulled over for speeding by a state trooper with a car full of friends in college. I didn't have time to explain to them what I was about to do. And to just go with it. Officer is walking with that swagger walk they do when they do they're gonna write a ticket and he comes up to the window and I'm having a full-on asthma attack wheezing and rocking back and forth saying my inhaler ran out. Trying to get to a Walgreens for a new one the guy was like oh shit. Follow me. I got a police escort to buy a pack of gum. Got out of the ticket. My parents used to run a bed and breakfast. And we used to keep a section of the house locked, only light security. Was just supposed to stop guests accidentally going into our living space. We used to keep the key on top of a door frame. Turns out the frame was hollow and there was a hole on the top. I put the key up there. It fell into the hole but didn't sound like it dropped all the way to the floor. 14-year-old me didn't realize taking the door frame off isn't a major job. So I was a bit worried my parents would kill me. Found myself a wire coat hanger. Straightened it out and attached a magnet to the end to go key fishing. It was more out of desperation than anything else but it somehow worked. A storm broke a limb on a tree hanging over my house in my backyard. But it was still hanging on by a few splinters. I didn't want it to fall. And it wasn't in a place where I could use my ladder to get to it. So I found some rope. Tied a brick to it. Threw the brick and rope over the limb. Made a crude rope swing. And swung and pulled at the branch until it finished breaking. It wasn't until I was using the chainsaw to cut it up that I realized how many times during my stupid idea I could have easily hurt or even killed myself. Something broke on the front wheel of my car while I was on a cross-country trip. And it made a terrible noise and smoke. It was the middle of the night and the shops in the town we pulled into were all closed. I jacked it up to see what was wrong. Took off the wheel. And then the jack tipped over and the car dropped onto the exposed brake disc. I did it again and the same thing happened. I jacked it up again. Still couldn't figure out what was wrong. Put the wheel back on. And whatever it was had been fixed by the jobs. I drove that car for years with no further problems. After school engineering program. We were supposed to make tiny boats from aluminum foil and whichever team's boat could carry the heaviest weight without sinking would win. My team's boat was tied for first place and I happened to be snacking on a mini pretzels. As a joke I decided to add a piece of pretzel to our boat. The other team had 2 pieces and their boat sunk. We won. I jumped in a puddle with a frozen sheet of ice on top to get out of doing a test I didn't study for in elementary school. Soaked and freezing. I told my teacher that I slipped and fell. She called my mother to pick me up and I got another day to study. It was below zero and I could have gotten hypothermia or something. But I guess it worked. It worked the first time. My buddies and I were driving down the street. About a quarter mile. There were no more spots in the car so I couldn't fit. But I didn't feel like walking. I stood on the back bumper and held onto the top of the car. We drove the quarter mile at about 25-30 miles an hour with me holding on for dear life and we made it fairly quickly. The second time we did this I fell off. Broken arm. Got a concussion and wicked scars. was really poor when my future wife and I exited college. Went on a cruise with friends and didn't have a lot of money to spend. Cruise wouldn't allow you to bring alcohol on board and we weren't willing to pay for drinks due to budget. Purchased a liter-sized sealed bottle of water and some cheap rum. Drilled a hole in the bottom to drain the water and funnel in the rum. Then superglued the bottom again. Water was caught by ship security scanner but guard said it's just water and let us through. We had cheap mixed drinks for the duration. We look back on those days fondly. We wouldn't never think of doing that today. But it was funny back when we were young. When I was in the Coast Guard, I was rearranging my room in my apartment and had sat my TV on the edge of the bed. While I was moving my desk, I heard a loud thump and turned around to see that my TV had fallen off of my bed and was sitting face down on the floor. I picked it up and turned it on and the screen was just blue and wouldn't do anything else. I sat there for a few minutes wondering if I could even afford another TV before the dumbest idea hit me. Maybe if I sit it back on the edge of my bed and give it a slight nudge to land face down again, it will bump everything inside back into place and fix it. I laughed at myself for even thinking it but then was like, well, worst case is that it still won't work. Double quote. So I did it. I hopelessly plugged it back in and to my surprise, it turned right on and worked just fine again. I still laugh and shake my head every time I think about it. My father was in the military for a while when our country still had active civic duty. He was stationed in Germany. They had the assignment to hide their rocket launcher in the woods as good as possible. And some officers would check in on them every once in a while. At the same time, they had to watch out for the officers. The assignment took place at night. So somewhere late afternoon nightish. They went their way. And they encountered a local farmer. They asked him if they could maybe sleep in the barn when they were not on watch. He told them yes. And that they could also put the rocket launcher in the barn if they wished. They decided they would. They also spread a lot of twigs across the area so they could hear the officers coming. And quickly go out and pretend they were on watch. At night, they heard the twigs break several times. But the officers never thought to check the barn. They were never found and completed it and were told they did very well. While they were just sleeping in the hay. Changing the brakes on my rusted out Pose VW. But the lug nuts, bolts actually, were totally froze so we couldn't get them off. Even tried bouncing up and down on a breaker with a 3 feet cheater pipe. So we made sure breaker bar was on nice and tight. Started it up. And drove backwards until the pipe hit the ground and then drove it off. It worked. We did the same for the other side going forward. Couldn't believe we didn't shear any bolts or lose a wheel. For future reference, pull up instead of pushing down when trying to torque the lug nuts off. At most pushing down you can apply your weight with a bit of a bounce. If you pull up like a deadlift you can pull with hundreds of pounds of force.